Roman Reigns made his long-awaited return to WWE at SummerSlam in Cleveland as he came out during the main event, Cody Rhodes versus Solo Sikoa, and Roman destroyed Solo Sikoa to allow Cody Rhodes to retain the WWE Undisputed title. And as we talked about going into it, there were lots of scenarios that could play out in terms of, would it just be Roman that came back? Would Jimmy come back with him? Would Paul Heyman come back? Could there be others like Jey Uso, Sami Zayn, getting into the mix with the Bloodline Civil War? None of that happened. It was just Roman by himself, and I think the way that WWE executed it tells us why that was the case. And in hindsight, if you look back at it, it made sense why Roman was the one to come out by himself, not surrounded by Jimmy, not surrounded by Heyman, and there are logical reasons for it. During the post-show press conference, Triple H said something interesting. He was asked a question about SummerSlam being potentially this being the last SummerSlam we see as a one-night SummerSlam event. And, you know, without him officially saying yes, right, he kind of made it obvious that, look, that this may very well be the last time we get a SummerSlam that's only one night, because we know we're moving to 2 nights next year in Minneapolis, and you would think from there they're only going to continue that 2-night theme for WrestleMania, for SummerSlam, maybe potentially the Royal Rumble, and perhaps other matches or other shows as well in the future, Survivor Series, who knows. But his answer was interesting because as he talked about, you know, we could have added a lot of stuff to this SummerSlam card this year. And if you guys watched the reaction show I did, which, by the way, if you haven't checked it out, you can check it out here on the channel. We went about an hour. We talked about a lot of different things. But one of the things I said is they could have easily added probably 3 or 4 more matches to this card if you really wanted to make it a 2-night event this year. I don't know that it would have helped things overall because you had all 7 matches here really mean something. How does that factor into Roman Reigns returning by himself? Well, here's what Triple H said. So he responded by saying, we could have added all this stuff, but you also need all this other stuff. You need a massive amount of content each week for Raw, for SmackDown. And so, why did Roman Reigns come back? And why did maybe initially we're thinking, maybe just do the whole combination, right? You have Heyman come out, do the ladies and gentlemen. That signals Reigns to return. Maybe Jimmy comes out before that, all that stuff. The fact is, when you really think about it, and look, you guys know I did the video on Roman Reigns' return and booking it and trying to figure out the best ways they can do it. I like the idea of Jey and Sami somehow being involved, and maybe you do get everybody out there on this one night. But what Triple H said is important, because as he talked about, you need all that content for Raw and SmackDown. And by only bringing Roman Reigns back by himself, now you have all those moments you can now get to coming out of SummerSlam. You now have the Jimmy Uso return you can get to. You have the Paul Heyman return you can get to. You have the recruitment of Jey Uso back into the story, Sami Zayn back into the story, and anyone else who is going to sort of get involved with this. Because one of the defining visuals here, as we know, on SummerSlam, was Roman Reigns helping Cody Rhodes, right? That was one of the things here where Roman does his thing on Solo, Cody's sitting there, and you get the great camera shot here. You can see this, just a tremendous shot of Cody just kind of sitting back, leaning against the ropes, and Roman just sort of giving him that stare. Ultimately, Roman would give him the nod and all of that. But even if you have all of this other stuff happen before that, right? Let's say Jimmy comes back. Let's say Heyman comes back. Jey and or Sami get involved here at SummerSlam. What happens? Not that they become afterthoughts, but you do kind of forget about it in the grand scheme of what we're talking about here, right? It's all about Roman Reigns. This was the thing people have been waiting months and months for. And so, now that I look back on it, it should have been pretty simple. Once they decided to bring back Randy Orton and Kevin Owens, that's when you kind of knew, okay, these are the 2 who are coming back into the picture. You have to get them out of there, as we've discussed. Like we said, you got to get them out of the ring. That happened. And this became about Roman Reigns' return. It didn't need to be about anybody else because now you can build to, whether on Raw, whether on SmackDown. We've kind of talked about the ideas of having Heyman go out and re-recruit Jimmy Uso, Jey Uso, Sami Zayn, all of these pieces that have to come back into place here to get you to the November War Games match at Survivor Series, where we know it's going to be Solo's side versus Roman's side. The question is who's going to be on each side. And I think even here, when you see this visual, it is somewhat of that tease that potentially you could have Cody involved in that match, unless maybe it's a Kevin Owens that joins with Sami Zayn, if he's in the mixture there with Jey and Jimmy and Roman, all of that. But again, I think why you ultimately had Roman come back by himself here is because you also couldn't just fast forward quickly to the story. Like even this part right here with Roman and Cody Rhodes having sort of the stare off and all this. You couldn't just fast forward past all the history. Cody said in the press conference after SummerSlam, he still doesn't like Roman Reigns. But you had, again, that tension between the two, and you had the stare, right? That was enough. You had Roman come out, make it very clear he was not going to sit back and take what Solo had been dishing out here, right? He's done it for a little while, but now is his time to return. This was the moment because he cost Solo an opportunity to get that championship, right? And that was good enough for now. You didn't get the interaction with Jacob Fatu, and trust me, we've talked about that in the reaction show. I think people are still debating whether that's an actual legit injury or not, if it keeps Jacob Fatu out of action, if it was supposed to happen to keep the interaction from Roman and Jacob Fatu not happening. We won't go into all that here. But the history between Roman Reigns, Cody Rhodes, Roman Reigns, Jimmy Uso, Roman Reigns, Jey Uso, Roman Reigns, Sami Zayn, you couldn't just fast forward and get all of that in one night. And I think that's where, again, in hindsight, for me, if I'm looking at it, going back, yes, like they were not going to rush this. Because, too, with the Bloodline story, and people have made this one of the criticisms, right? If you want to criticize the story over the past however many months, sure, there have been people talking about, is Solo really, filling in this role the way that Roman Reigns did? As I've said many times, I think it's an unfair expectation. If you thought Solo was going to be Roman in this role, we knew that wasn't going to happen. He wasn't going to be Roman. He wasn't going to be The Rock. But he's Solo, right? And he's different, and that's something where, hey, they've embraced that, and they've gone with it. But it's been a little bit slow moving because you've been waiting for this big return. And so now you have the beginning of this, right? It's Roman Reigns returning. And so everything that Solo did to build to this point, you now have that in place. We are just at the start now because now you have to go out and you have to, kind of weave through all that history between all these people that are going to have to somehow coexist, right? That's always been something in WWE where you have the unlikely tag team partners and all of that. But really, for this story, it makes sense to push the coexisting stuff because we remember what Sami Zayn did to Roman Reigns. We remember what Jey Uso did to remove himself from the bloodline. We know the history now between Jey and Jimmy, all this stuff. And so I didn't think it would be good, as you look at it now, to have everyone just come back together on the same night, unless it was one of those just random things, right? Unless you had Sami and Jey come out because they're helping Cody. Nothing to do with Roman, they're helping Cody. And then maybe you had Jimmy come out, not to help Cody necessarily, but to go after Solo, the person who, destroyed them and the new bloodline, all that. And then maybe you get everybody, in the same sort of area, and then everyone's kind of looking around wondering, oh boy, like, what have we gotten ourselves into? But they didn't go that route, and that's okay, because like I said, now it gives you the chance on Raw, on SmackDown. You are able to fill, as Triple H said, a massive amount of content over the next several months to build to that War Games match. There could still be singles matches included in there along the way. Like I said, when do they do Roman versus Solo? Is that a longer one down the road? Do they do it sooner? A bad blood type scenario? We don't know yet, but I think that is something where now it is very understandable with the way they did it. You understand why Roman came back alone. He didn't have Jimmy. He didn't have Heyman, because those are big moments you can build to. And if there's anything we've learned from the Triple H era, and if you want to criticize Triple H for this or that or whatever, one thing you cannot criticize him for is his ability to build up the big, meaningful moments. And we saw that at SummerSlam with Roman Reigns returning. We saw that with some of the other developments on SummerSlam, right? With Dominic and Liv, with Finn Balor turning on Damian Priest. These were all stories that were months in the making. And so, with this, you now have the opportunity, rather than just running through all of them on the same night, having Roman come back, Jey come back, you have Heyman come back, you get Sami and Jey back out there. That's 4 moments you could have had in the same night. Why do that when you have to fill, as Triple H said, all of this content on Raw and SmackDown? And I think it just makes a lot of sense, right? Now you're able to do this week after week. The suspense grows, the drama, the saga that is the Bloodline, it continues to grow from here. And that's going to make it to where you have to tune into Raw, you have to tune into SmackDown, because you want to see if the Wise Man returns soon, if Jimmy returns soon, how do they do it? And how does this new version of the Bloodline with Solo, Jacob Fatu, Tama Tonga, Tonga Loa, how do they combat everything that's about to happen now that Roman Reigns has returned? And so I think that is how we're setting things up to move forward here. Of course, the Jacob Fatu thing could impact that, but we'll talk about that once we know what the deal is there. But you guys let me know what you think about Roman Reigns making his big return at SummerSlam. I know some of you guys have already weighed in on it in the SummerSlam reaction show, but would love to know your thoughts on it. Where do you think things go from here? You would assume Roman's going to be on SmackDown on Friday. And then how do we start to get everyone else reintroduced into this? Because Roman comes back alone. Now you got to bring everybody else back in the mix. You got a couple months to do it. How does it happen? You guys let me know your thoughts in the comments. Always appreciate you watching. Be sure to subscribe button, hit the like button on your way out, and let me know your thoughts on the return of the original Tribal Chief and what's next for the Bloodline Civil War.